So pretty much every format, there's always that debate of which hand traps are the best, which board breakers are the best, etc. Issue with hand traps right now is that the meta for them is pretty stale, and the answer is pretty much always the same. You play Ash because it's super generic, and then you play Imperm because it's just so good, and then you play Veiler, and then you play Mourner, Drool, or Nib, or a combination of anything. But there's rarely going to be a format where people are actually going to be talking about these spicy options like Skullmeister and Retaliating Sea. And if they do, it's usually in the side deck, not in the main deck. As for board breakers, they're kind of in a similar boat, but at the same time, they do differ from each other in a sense. I'd have to say that Droplet and Dark Ruler are the two board breakers that people always compare to because they are just so similar. With that said, drawing a bunch of redundant board breakers isn't as good as drawing a bunch of redundant hand traps like drawing double Veiler. Therefore, players typically choose to play either Dark Ruler or Droplet because if you draw a combination of both, it's not gonna be really good. Now, how can you tell for a given format which board breaker is the better one to play? Well, I'll say this, I think that Dark Ruler is in a very good position at the moment. As a matter of fact, it is actually one of the most played cards in the side deck, and for a very good reason, it's particularly due to Yubel gaining in popularity. Every single one of their in-engine interruption is a threat in the monster zone unless they go for the Abominable Chamber, the Unchained Trap card, in order to revive back the Unchained Soul of Rage on your turn. But that's assuming that they play the Trap card and go for that combo. Either way, you're still shutting down their Yubel Fusion, their Appaloosa, their Omni Negate, you're doing a lot with one single card. Whereas if you had to use Droplet here, it might be a little too expensive for you because you would have to send 3 cards or maybe sometimes even 4 cards, and then you only have like 1 or 2 cards to play with, which is not too much. And I say that because they can pull all these interruptions off with only one single card, and they still have 4 other cards in hand, which might be hand traps, and if you have to, deal with a bunch of hand traps when you only have 2 cards in hand, it's gonna be a little rough. And I want to say that is the main argument to ever play Dark Ruler over Droplet for the card economy. If your deck is already neggy, for example the White Forest deck that always has to pitch spells and trap cards in order to use their effects, then maybe Droplet isn't good for you. Or maybe Droplet might be perfect for you because it can unbrick you and actually get your stuff going if you got Toy Box. Anyways, I mentioned how Dark Ruler is pretty good against Yubel, but it is also good against Snake Eyes. Well, unless they have access to the Fiendsmith engine, so let's pray to God that Moon of the Closed Sky does not get printed in Infinite Forbidden. Otherwise, we're all screwed. I'm not joking. Unfortunately, I want to say Dark Ruler does not deal with IP in the Spell and Trap Zone and Princess Engrave, but it's still really good at negating Appaloosa, Harbinger, and also whatever else they may have on the field. Now, there's obviously a pretty good reason why people choose to play hand traps over board breakers against Snake Eyes. It's because they don't want to deal with everything that is in the Spell and Trap Zone and in the graveyard. Now, against decks that are super resilient to hand traps like Melodious, I want to say it's the exact opposite. Hand traps are pretty weak against them because they can easily push through a lot, but at the same time, regardless of how juiced their hand is, there's kind of like a certain cap to the amount of interruptions they can pump out. There is not a substantial difference in terms of end board between like a 2-card combo and a 5-card combo. They're always gonna end on the same board, which is like Flowering Etoile, Arya, and Shuberta. Or maybe they can add some generic things like Appaloosa and Vortex, but again, one single Dark Ruler takes care of everything. And I want to say the Melodious deck is probably optimal when it draws like a 1-card combo, an extender, and 2 to 3 hand traps. That way, if you hand trap them, they can recover, and if you board breaker them, then they still have hand traps to deal with you. But think about it, against that kind of hand, if you had like 1 hand trap, they can still full combo through it, and then you have to deal with the full board and their hand traps. Whereas on the other hand, if you Dark Ruler them, their extender doesn't really serve any purpose, and their hand traps are the only thing that can scare you. So yeah, in this instance, having a board breaker approach is drastically better than having a hand trap approach. Oh, and not to mention that Dark Ruler is all you'll ever need against Ice Barrier. And Dark Ruler is drastically better in the Droplet here because Herald of Arclight can actually make Droplet way worse. If you Dark Ruler them, all they really have for you would either be hand traps or the Runic Engine. It is pretty good, but at least you don't have to deal with everything that they may have, because if you, for example, were relying on hand traps and they make an early Herald of Arclight, then you're completely screwed. With that said, there are some matchups where Dark Ruler is completely useless and you would rather draw Forbidden Droplet. And these 2 matchups are specifically Despia and Centurion. So Droplet doesn't necessarily always deal with Albion and its ability to summon Gimmick Puppet Nightmare on your turn. There is a workaround with Branded Lost, but more often than not, Droplet should be good enough. Against Centurion though, they typically need Solemn Judgment in order to beat Forbidden Droplet used on Crimson Dragon, so you should definitely be good. So to sum it up, I want to say Dark Ruler is probably the best board breaker to rely on in this format. With that said, all it takes for you to regret playing it would be to be facing off against a lot of Centurion or Despia. Now the odds are kind of getting lower and lower because Despia is seeing less plays, since obviously the Gimmick Puppet Nightmare lock is completely useless against Gimmick Puppet. But then again, I would still understand why people would choose to go with Droplet over Dark Ruler despite it costing way more in terms of card resources. Anyways, that's all I had for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know how you feel about Dark Ruler and Droplet in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.